Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining. We are going to give it about a minute or two to allow for more people to sign on. We'll start around 4:02, 4:03 p.m. Eastern Time. In the meantime, I'm Lauren. We'll do a bit more formal introductions a little later. And on the line, I have Anne and Sujal. Hi, guys. How are you doing today?
Thanks, Lauren. Doing pretty well.
Yeah, doing great.
Yeah, it's I'm in Jersey, but very close to New York. So it's like pretty nice out today, finally. It's been kind of on and off here with like the weather.
Yeah, I think it's been hot in LA, hasn't it been, Sujal?
Yeah, I was going to say I'm in Los Angeles and the weather is fairly consistent all year long, but it's actually hot today.
I was talking to one of our employees who was saying that they have central air plus additional kind of in-unit room conditioners, and they were all on just to be able to sleep through the night.
I have we have like fans hitting us because for some reason, even in the winter, like my bedroom is like a sauna. It just makes no sense. It's like the AC blasting at like 65 and then just fans hitting us in order to get a night's sleep. But I love the summer. It's like my favorite time.
Yeah, it's nice. And I think that a lot of people are taking advantage of that to be able to get out, utilize our national parks, go for a hike, be outdoors, have a social distance. It's hard to be trapped indoors in beautiful weather.
Yeah, there have to be some advantages, right, to a pandemic, even if they're small.
Yeah, I've gone on a lot of hikes, so that's been a plus because typically we're just like, oh, it's the weekend, we want to drive like 20-30 minutes, and now we're like, yes, we want to drive 20 or 30 minutes to see like beautiful scenery and just get out of our apartment, please.
I
think that and my kids are getting sick of family meals.
Are they really?
No, I'm just joking. But normally we have to schedule them ahead of time.
Yes,
we might get to squeeze one in a week, but now it's like, oh, we're not going anywhere else. So.
Yeah, I think I'm doing the same thing as everyone else in terms of I'm doing just a lot more cooking at home. Everyone is not only a epidemiologist on the side, but also a baker. There was a great run on yeast for a while in terms of like everyone, I'm someplace at home, let's bake.
I know, who would have thought, like I would have gotten yeast futures.
Right? And it came in waves, right? I think the first was like hand sanitizer, then toilet paper, then yeast. Which is just interesting what the shortages were across the country at certain times.
Yeah. At least you know for the next pandemic.
Yeah, right. What to stock up on slowly.
What to grab off the shelf.
Okay, well, it looks like we have a good number of people on, so we can just start off. I want to thank everybody again who is taking the time to join us this afternoon. I'm Lauren. I work with the portfolio success team at Two Sigma Ventures. I help manage events as well as talent and other team initiatives. Before we start, we do want to let everybody know this webinar is being recorded. We would love to share it with you and those of us who couldn't join as a resource to use in the future. For those of you who don't know us, we are an early stage venture fund who invests primarily in seed, Series A, Series B, startups across enterprise tech, consumer tech, and biotech. We have an underlying thesis that companies that use data science and advanced engineering will transform their industries. We are fortunate to have invested in over 70 companies in the past 8 years, with one of those being Carbon Health. I wanted to give you guys a little bit of feedback on why we started this series. We started going remote to help us navigate the change from abruptly shifting from in-office work to remote work. Over the past few months, we've discussed going remote best practices and norms, how to hire and onboard remotely, and how to support your team's mental health during these unprecedented times. As a VC firm, we have heard from a number of companies that they're thinking about reopening offices. Certain companies in our portfolio, including Carbon Health, and other of those in biotech and healthcare who have labs and have to be there in person, have already reopened or are slowly doing so. We hope this webinar can be a resource to help you figure out when is the right time and how to come back to your offices safely and confidently. We partnered with Carbon Health because they've been in the front lines of battling COVID and have been gracious enough to join us to share insight on a program they've developed to help us all get back to work. With that, I'll pass it along to our panelists to give us some more information on Carbon Health as well as their backgrounds. We'll start with their Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Sujal Mandavia. Sorry.
Great, thanks, Lauren.
You're welcome.
Thank you for hosting this. This is this is important, especially, I know we'll probably get into some details as we take questions, but just it is not an easy topic, and it can be very overwhelming for any organization trying to figure out how to, when to, and why to get back into the office or get back to their normal work routine. So thank you for that. I'm the chief medical officer. I'm an emergency physician. I've been practicing for about 25 years and come from a background of healthcare administration, and joined Carbon about a year ago because I was very excited about the potential of an amazing integration between technology and medical group operations to be able to really expand access in a scale that I couldn't do in my former careers.
Great, thank you. And we also have Ann Lee, their SVP of Business Development, on the line.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again for joining today. And I just want to echo Sujal's compliments. I am very much attracted to Carbon because of that combination between technology and healthcare and our ability to modernize and change the way healthcare is delivered to the world. I'm head of the COVID ready business, and I've been spending, days and months at this point in time talking to HR professionals across the board, whether it's essential businesses, whether it's manufacturing, the sports, the film industry, all the way to corporate workers trying to get back in the office and understanding where people are at, how they're doing, how we can help them. My background is in enterprise SaaS, and I've been heading BD for companies like New Relic and Yammer, and really excited to be here and share in the knowledge of what we can do as Carbon to help the broader enterprise community.
Awesome, thanks again for that. Before we start, I just want to share the webinar format with everybody who's on. We have compiled a few questions over the past couple of weeks that I'll be chatting with them about. And then about midway, we will bring Kat, who leads our talent and networking efforts, on. She will share questions that we receive from you, the participants. We do hope that you share any questions you have using the Q&A button that you can find at the top or the bottom of your screen. And if you don't ask your questions anonymously, we'll love to bring you on the line so you can ask us your questions directly. Right now, if you click on the Q&A box and go to answered questions, you should see an agenda link. Here we'll compile the questions that come in throughout the webinar, as well as share all the resources that we hear about from Carbon Health. So with that, we'll get started with our chat. All right, so our first question is, with Carbon Health being on the front lines, providing care and testing for hundreds of thousands of people in the past few months, how did you prepare your own staff and offices for when the pandemic first started?
So, Lauren, I'll take that one. I think that what I'd want everybody to do is kind of do a mind exercise with me and kind of rewind back. I know COVID time is very blurred. I think it's past, present, future. But if you rewind back and think back to late January, early February, when I think all of us were just starting to learn about this, we had gotten kind of a early peek into the disease because we saw one of the first community-based cases in the US. And because of that, we got an early warning. And I would tell you that when I think back to that circumstance, we were dealing with a situation where we had very little information. We knew very little about the disease. We knew probably less about the factors of transmission. And we had a large job to do. We wanted to make sure we could be present, that we could keep our team safe, and that we could kind of lean out and help the communities that we were a part of. But we had to give our team confidence in order to do that. And I would tell you that part of that was more prescribed. It was, the infection control protocols we use are based on what the CDC has been doing, and we have experience from prior pandemics, whether it's Ebola, et cetera, that give us a sense of what the rules of engagement are there. But there were added twists. Getting access to PPE was a challenge at the time. And I would tell you that one that was not insignificant that I still think is a factor today, and I see it with businesses we speak with, are even the social emotional aspects. How do you deal with the broad bell curve of where people are in their mental state, of the anxiety, and giving them both the confidence as well as gaining that trust. That was not easy. I think we were able to achieve it with our team, and I have to give a shout out to our team, both the clinical team, the engineers, all our headquarter folks worked like triple time to be able to make things happen and mobilize the appropriate resources. But it takes a lot of really clear communication, transparency, and an intense focus on making sure you're being precise about what work means. And those are the same principles that we use now in helping to guide our business partners in getting them back to work safely.
And then the one thing I would note there is that we remained open through the entire pandemic. As an urgent care, we consider ourselves to be part of the community and wanted to have access to testing, capacity, medical resources, and ensure that we were helping where we could. And so we have over 200 clinicians that have stayed in business, stayed open, helping people provide testing. And these are the types of folks that are actually most at risk because they're seeing positive COVID patients every single day, multiple times a day. And with that, we've been able to test over 100,000 people. Our staff have kept with the protocol, social distancing, PPE wearing. They also answer a daily symptom tracker. As we talk about mobilizing, putting that together, where our chief medical officer will review those questions, those answers, and be able to highlight hotspots. And this is actually the genesis of the program that we are now offering to our business partners. This idea of the protocols, the daily symptom tracking, the testing that we've put together, so that we, initially just to keep our team safe.
Yeah, that's great to know. With some of our companies in our portfolio that are just starting to think about returning back to the office, for those that are just kind of, debating on the question, where should they start? And what should be their first thoughts about returning?
Yeah, and I'm happy to answer this one. I actually talked to a number of companies in the same place that are, may have been sheltering in place, may have thought about coming to office. And the fact is that a lot of the HR teams, the facilities, the ops teams, this is the first time they've dealt with something. It's brand new to all of us. And they're looking for advice from a clinical and medical standpoint. And when you look at the CDC guidelines, the WHO guidelines, the local county guidelines, one, they're relatively vague. They give you some idea of what you need to do, but they're not specific and they're not customized to your situation. And so there's 4 kind of main areas we think about. The first is around the physical space. It's a medical protocol review of how do you actually make your office space safe for your employees to be there physically, and whether that is about phasing in people over time, whether that's about wearing PPE in common areas, sanitizing on a regular basis, social distancing when it comes to your cubicles, your conference rooms. What does it mean for communal areas? How do you think about elevator situations and coming in and out of the elevator? So all of those things where, we are happy to sit down and, experts like Sujal, as well as, our additional colleagues on our team will walk through what you've planned already, provide clinical guidance and that type of, consultation. And, not everyone is as lucky as we are to have a CMO like Sujal on their team. And that's where taking what you've planned based on the protocols that are given and then customizing it for what is appropriate to you. The one note I would say is that there is a rise and fall of the virus in our community today. So depending on where you are location-wise, what is the prevalence of the virus in the region, if you don't have to, I would not rush to go back to work today. If you don't have to. If you can continue to be productive and shelter in place, that is the safest method. If there is a need and things get, less chaotic when it comes to the spread of the virus, that's where you'd start planning and saying, okay, if the prevalence is lower, if I feel safe, if my team is in a good place, that's when I would continue to push with these plans. This time is meant for planning, and then we can execute upon that to bring people back in the office and phased over time. The one caveat there, of course, is essential workers. Folks that need to be in the office, need to be physically present to do their job, whether that's manufacturing, whether that's going to be health and safety. Oftentimes we see that there is a very specific reason in biotechnology, for example, that you have to be in the office to be able to get your work done. And with that, similarly, we talk about what are the physical limitations, what are the protocols, how can we help, how can we think about that physical space? And on top of that, a combination of education for your employees to keep them safe. So anywhere from how to wear a mask, how to sanitize their workspace, how to think about social distancing in their own lives. Because if you have the right protocols in place within the office space, they're less likely to have viral spread there. They're more likely to get it at a summer barbecue or going to the park and then bring it into the office. And so we really want to make sure that we think of every individual keeping themselves safe outside as well as inside the office space.
Yeah, we see the education as being very foundational because of what Anne had referenced. You know, it's really about developing the right habits. You know, we all have to develop those as a society, whether it's the masking, the hand sanitizing, et cetera, because it's those things that are really, I tell people masks are the seatbelt of coronavirus. That's how we're gonna help prevent that spread. You know, the only thing I'd add on to what Anne had said, and obviously there's a lot of different facets we're touching on, you know, a lot of different decisions that have to be made. I wanna give everybody permission to not have to make decisions that they won't control. And I think it's important to kind of parse out your plan in that way, because there are going to be some decisions that are made for you with respect to, well, can we go back to work? What does going back to work look like with respect to some of the constraints, i.e. the physical distancing, et cetera? Some of these are just the structural barrier, like the structural walls of how you manage COVID and operate a business at the same time. And if you don't separate those out, it's easy to have them create that kind of cognitive overload that I see a lot of folks getting paralyzed in.
Great, that's super helpful. We will be sharing a couple of resources they mentioned about how to wear a mask and in the agenda that we shared in the Q&A box. The next question, when you were talking about physical space, is there anything that you can discuss with us now about how that actually looks like, especially in the areas such as conference rooms, pantries, restrooms, and how to clean and sanitize your own personal workspaces?
So I can start with that. You know, as we mentioned, like if you kind of work from first principles, you know, it's really about making sure you've got adequate distance between your employees. Again, 6 feet is what's recommended. More is always better if you can. And I know that that's often quite a challenge, especially in certain circumstances, whether it's a conference room, and I'd mentioned an elevator. You know, like, well, maybe you can only fit one person in that elevator. Then you've got to plan ahead, and you may want to stagger start times for your teams in a way that prevents some of the batching that might lead to folks breaking some of that social distancing. So, you know, starting with the distancing, making sure that you're mindful of the routes and path of travel through your office. So you're minimizing two-way traffic. Pay attention to higher risk areas, meaning areas where they're more likely to be hubs of transmission, whether it's break rooms or kitchen areas or bathrooms, and have distinct, sanitizing protocol for those, as well as a way of giving people, again, either staggering access times or at least an awareness of who's in the room and what are the rules of engagement. If somebody's already in the room, what's the capacity and how do I do my workflow of just getting a snack?
Yeah, that's super helpful. I know, especially like I sit less than 6 feet away from like 3 of my colleagues. So it's gonna be interesting once like things, even after it clears, what that's gonna look like.
Yeah, and again, I mentioned, you know, it's easy for me to say, oh, well, everybody has to be over 6 feet apart, but that's not always possible. And especially as Anne had mentioned, we work with some businesses that are in manufacturing, and you can't necessarily retool your manufacturing process sometimes. So there are other implements or barriers or PPE that we can make recommendations on that can help mitigate the risk of transmission, even if you have to be closer than 6 feet.
Yeah, and I think the key message here is that every situation is somewhat customizable. We have these protocols, we have kind of the general guidelines, but then how does that translate for your office space? What does that mean? And as you mentioned, Lauren, the idea of, well, I've only got, you know, a certain amount of space here to my colleagues, that was what was in the past. Maybe it's every other day, and you guys kind of phase in and out, who takes turns, so that there are fewer people in office that allows you for more space.
Okay. And as employees do start going back, how can an employer monitor their employees' health? Could it be like a daily check-in, daily temperature checks, really give you the accurate information? What would you recommend?
Yeah, and one of the key things that we think about is that people are coming from very different places. Some people may be very stringent about shelter in place. Some people may have gotten a vacation home, out of state and out in the country, and everyone's coming back. And one of the things that we do think about is that let's get everybody on the same playing field to come back and be in a place where we recognize that regardless of what your personal interaction has been, that coming back from the workplace, you are safe. And so this is where we do recommend what is considered a baseline test. This idea of giving everybody a PCR viral test to say, are you infected with COVID today? And are you healthy and safe to enter back in the workplace? And so we all start and on that level playing field. And this is where we're able to catch both people who are symptomatic as well as asymptomatic, and make sure that they have the care and treatment they need before they enter that workplace to make it that a safe space. And we recognize that testing is expensive, it can be cumbersome, and it's not realistic to test your employees every single day. So what do you do beyond that to employ that idea of safety? And for us, and again, we look at the clinical standpoint, is we have folks answer their daily questions. And so questions are, one, what is your exposure to a known COVID-19 positive patient? And of course, that can change on a day-to-day basis. Two, do you have a fever? And if you do, what is that temperature? And three, do you have any of these symptoms that could be COVID related? It could be loss of smell, loss of taste, runny nose, etc. And part of our protocol is you answer these questions, we have an algorithm involved, and at the end of that, it assesses you for risk. And if you are considered high risk based on those answers, again, if you say no, great, move forward with your day. If you say yes, we actually dig in to that symptomology. What is the severity? What is the duration of that? How long have you had it? Do you have any other symptoms that are associated with it? We recommend that you then talk to one of our virtual clinicians. Again, is it hay fever? Or is it possibly COVID, and what does that look like? And having a clinical oversight to help you make that determination to say, yes, I think it's a high risk individual based on the symptomology, and I think that they need to isolate and get a test and provide access to testing. And so that's where we think about that baseline to come back, daily symptom tracking, and then access to testing when needed, so that we're not, there is no world outside of testing everybody every single day that you're going to guarantee there's going to be no outbreak of any sort and then no one's going to infect it. It's just not realistic. The more important question is, what do you do? How do you get in front of it? And then how do you isolate that person to ensure there isn't an outbreak in your larger population? And that's where we really think the combination of monitoring and testing on an as needed basis is going to be critically important.
Yeah, one thing I would add on about the symptom tracking, there are many solutions for symptom tracking, but many of them don't gain the advantage of having any type of persistence, because you can't store that information unless you're doing it in a HIPAA compliant way. We're a medical provider, so we get to do that. We want that information because, as Ann had mentioned, we don't see ourselves as just hosting a form on a website or on an app. We see ourselves as medical providers wanting to take care of your employees like patients. So what we're able to do is dig into those symptoms. But I think even if we weren't digging into those symptoms, what I've experienced over and over in speaking with many individuals, and quite often it's often HR leaders who are put in the position of having to manage this whole process. And I can't tell you how often they're put into a situation where they're really having to make a clinical judgment about, well, okay, they have a headache. Yeah, okay, you can come back to work. They shouldn't have to be in that situation. And that's where I think that making sure you have a partner or a solution that allows you to navigate those, but not always have to overcorrect. Because the fear is that the only reaction you're gonna have is only binary. And if there's any type of question, the answer is, we'll just isolate them. And then the next question is, well, now what do you do? So there's, it's very complicated.
Yeah. And that goes into the extreme also of, if I have a symptom, everyone stays home, what does that productivity look like? And even it may not be necessarily COVID related. And then it goes into, well, if I do have a COVID positive case, what happens next? And I think that's a really big question that should be on everybody's mind as you think about this, because the reality is it's going to be with us for a long time. You know, COVID is not going away. We're not necessarily seeing a vaccine that's going to be widely distributed by the end of the year. And so the likelihood is, when we do go to work, here and there, we're going to have a couple of positive cases. And what do you do about it? And that's where we have that one-on-one relationship with the HR individuals, to say, yes, these are the protocols ahead of time, but you also have a partner to rely on to ask about these questions as they come. And to Sujal's point, it doesn't mean that if you have a positive case, you need to shut down your entire manufacturing plant. It doesn't mean that you have to shut down your entire office. These are contingency plans we talk about that allow us to do contact tracing within the workplace, that allow us to understand what the level of exposure may be, what the risk area are, to isolate those folks, get them tested, et cetera. And all of this to be able to have some continuity of work when you do plan to return.
Great. I love that you touched on the viral testing, but can you tell us a bit more about the different antibody tests that are out there, and how an employer can use an antibody test results to factor into an individual or the entire office returning?
Sure. I'll take that one. Although quite honestly, Anne she could probably get her master's in immunology at this point, with all the learning she's
well, I learned from the best.
But you know, you mentioned PCR and you mentioned antibody. I want to make sure that for your folks that we're not just glossing over even PCR, because there are two very distinct buckets of diagnostics. So I'll start with the PCR, just explain what it does, or what questions it answers. PCR technology is the one where we typically take a swab collection. It's either in the nose, at the front of the nose. It could be the brain tickler that everybody has heard about on YouTube.
I had that one.
Notoriety, right? Or it could be through the mouth, or it could be saliva. But you're basically getting a fluid sample that allows you to determine, could there be virus in the sample? Meaning, could you have not only an active infection, but also are you contagious? And that's often a more important question to answer, especially in the setting of managing your business and trying to prevent interruption, and also obviously detecting asymptomatic carriers or pre-symptomatic employees who may go on to become symptomatic. Ideally, we're picking them up early enough that they're not going to be a risk of transmission within your workplace, and that they're not going to cause an outbreak. So that's what PCR technology does. I'm not going to go into the details of how it works technically. I'm happy to do that a separate time if you want. I think we could go down a couple of different rabbit holes. Antibody testing is different. That's all done from a blood test. There are some forms of the test that use a pinprick, and you just kind of squeeze a little blood like you would for, say, a glucose test, or some cholesterol test. You can do that way, or other point of care tests. Or it could be done through a blood draw, like when you go to the doctor's office and they take blood from your vein. The antibody test is looking for your body's immune response to a COVID-19 infection. And the question is, well, does getting infected with COVID-19 always generate an immune response? And that's still a question mark, in that we don't know if everybody is generating antibodies to the infection, especially to the point where they will actually trigger a positive result on the assay. And then the second question is, even if you've got the antibodies on the test and you've got the piece of paper, and you're feeling proud that you've gotten
badge of honor.
All right, yeah, exactly. Where's the badge of honor? The problem is, we don't know if that actually means that you're immune. So you might end up being able to be reinfected, which, if you're an employer, now all of a sudden you've got a test that may or may not tell you whether or not your workforce member is immune, and therefore are they still the same transmission risk as everybody else, which means it doesn't necessarily create action or change in your management plan, especially when it comes to those basic strategies we spoke about: physical distancing, masking, etc. So it's something, it is an interesting data point. I think we're going to learn more about it as we kind of continue down the course of the pandemic. I think within the next 3 to 6 months, we'll have a lot more information about it. But today, it is not able to give you really actionable information.
Okay. All of this information is great, and I feel like it's informing me and informing everyone on the webinar. And you mentioned employee education a little earlier. Can you elaborate a bit more of like what employee education looks like and what kinds of questions an employee should ask an employer or should know before returning to work?
Yeah, I can start off with some of the educational components that we've put together that we think are incredibly important. We have a series of 6 educational videos. It goes into things like how to wear a mask properly, how to commute on mass transit and keep yourself safe.
Yeah.
How do you think about sheltering in place, and when it comes to ordering food delivery or getting groceries or sanitizing things as they come into the house. How to sanitize your mobile phone, because it tends to be a large carrier of germs and disease. So these are things, and again, you think about very much personal safety. It's not so different than the guidelines that have been put out there, but what does it mean from a person-to-person standpoint? What does it mean for you as an individual? And I think that we really want to be able to explore all aspects of your life, whether you're at home, whether you're out grocery shopping, whether you're on your way to work, because these are all places and factors that could, put you at risk in terms of contracting the disease. And so if we understand the guidelines, that's great, and those protocols, but as we dig deeper into each individual scenario, let's educate those folks about how to keep themselves safe.
Yeah, and I think it's important with that education to make sure you're meeting your audience where they are. So it's one thing to like download a poster from the CDC website, and I'm not trying to bash on the CDC. They've got amazing content and resources there, but that may not resonate with your workforce, and then therefore, are they really going to adopt those habits? And as I said before, it's all about the habits. And Ann had mentioned there's a lot of education we provide that would seem to have nothing to do with a workplace. But it's ultimately important, because if we don't develop those habits outside the workplace, all of that risk gets immediately transferred into your workplace. So we want to try and mitigate that wherever we can. I think by creating this type of content or partnering in a way that gets you access to that kind of content is really a gift that you're giving to your workforce, your employees, that will persist, because those are the habits that actually will help keep themselves safe and their loved ones safe at home or outside of their home.
Yeah, and the one thing that I would add also is that, we are all in a moment where it's anxiety driven. There's a lot of unknowns. People are doing different things. There's a mental health aspect of it as well. And the more that you as a business and HR team can really give that level of comfort that you've thought through this, that there are answers to protocols, that there are different scenarios you work through, that you are here and providing access to help and partnership to a medical service and medical community. Those are things that help drive down that level of anxiety, so people feel comfortable about coming back to work. And again, it is a professional, business oriented, but it's also very personal, because it's every single person making a choice about their families, their lives, what it means for them. They may be at home with an elderly parent that they take care of. They may have an immunosuppressed spouse. These things need to be taken in place. And the way that we think about it is every single person is a patient, that they have their own medical history, that they have their own issues that we're going to need to understand to be able to help them best.
Right. Speaking of leaders and HR representatives, how would you recommend, or how should they communicate to their offices, like how about returning to the workplace?
Yeah, and I think that obviously communication is key. That you get into a place where you are as transparent as possible. You're communicating regularly, even if people aren't in the workplace. There's a gap of information, and I feel like as you're doing all this planning internally, and you're thinking about, I've got all these things, it's months away, etc. You have to communicate as you go, and really acknowledge the environment that we're in. Two, recognize that people are having a hard time at home sometimes, especially parents with young kids, and a lot of factors there. And three, be flexible, so that when this phasing does happen, yes, you have plans, yes, you have protocols in place, but also be flexible to adjust around your population, really understand where your population is coming from. And so those levels of communication, transparency, the regularity of it, what you're saying, how you're saying it, having these plans in place, all that makes a difference in calming the anxiety and making sure that your workers are going to feel safe and happy to come back, and taken care of.
Yeah, and I think that for the business and HR leaders that are probably responsible for this, it's okay if you don't have the plan today, but you must have a plan, right? And I think that's what your employees are going to want to understand. But as Ann had said, the key is just to communicate what you know, communicate that you're working on the plan, what the aspects of the plan are. We think that it's really important to stand on the pillars of education, the right protocols, the monitoring, and then what happens when, not even if, but when one of your colleagues tests positive for COVID-19. Thinking through all of these things is really important, so that nobody has to reinvent that wheel, right, when you end up in the circumstance.
That was actually my next question is, what do you do if an employee has symptoms or tests positive while you're back at the office?
Yeah, well, what I would say is that for all the business and HR colleagues, you shouldn't have to play the role of being the doctor in the situation. So hopefully you've already thought through a plan where not only what do we do immediately with respect to when did this notification occur? Are they actually at the workplace at the time? How am I going to manage that? Meaning, well, does that mean that we, yank that individual out of their office and escort them out of the building, in a walk of shame? Probably not, right? But so thinking through some of those details is really, really important. And then, of course, as the physician, I always want to make sure that that individual is getting an evaluation and that we get a better understanding of what their needs are from a clinical basis. And then I think the other piece is, well, now that that's happened, and Anna's referenced it already, now we've got to go into kind of scramble mode and trigger your contact tracing protocol, which again is not always easy because there's a lot of noise that occurs in contact tracing that you have to kind of filter out to get a stronger signal to understand what do you do and what does this mean for your operations both today and tomorrow. And then also where does testing fit into this too? Whether it's in the return to work protocol, whether it's in testing and for folks who might have had a positive contact to that individual. Again, there's like a lot of important details that have to be thought through, and they're best done not in the moment.
Yeah, and one of the things that I wanted to add on to Sujal's point there was this idea of how do you collect all this data? How do you view all this data? How do you make it manageable for yourself? And it's one thing to say, I've got 5-10 employees, I can track them on a daily basis. I know what their status is. I know, kind of how they're preparing, et cetera. How do you take that and multiply it by 50, by 5,000? And that's where really having a technology play makes a difference, because you are able to track and monitor on a scalable way. And the idea is that you are able to, one, protect each individual's privacy while having the minimal amount of data that you as an HR team can take action on. And it goes into, if there's a symptom, if there's a test that needs to happen, what is the result of that test? How do I think about this in a scalable way so that I can then actually manage the protocols of getting people contact traced, notifying my team, as well as what does my return to work protocol look like? When somebody is positive, how do I think about making sure that they go through the course as needed? They, really hopefully get back to a healthy state. We test them again. We actually recommend a double negative. Test them once, ensure that there's no virus present, test them 24 hours later again, get that double negative, and then welcome them back into the office. And so as long as there is communication on these plans, there's things that are thought through, people know what to expect, I think that provides a lot of comfort, as well as prepares your internal teams for what needs to happen next.
Great. I just want to remind everybody on, if you have any questions, we're going to open up the line soon, and we've had a couple that come in. and just hit the Q&A button at the bottom or the top of your screen. I do have, you were discussing what to do and how people know who has COVID, had COVID. How do you how do you ensure employee and patient safety and privacy, whether it's using technology or if you're monitoring it yourself as a small business?
So one of the things that we do is that we ask every single employee to participate in the program to sign a authorization waiver around personal health. And it so says, you as a patient are sharing information with us, your medical provider, and we're HIPAA compliant, but we're allowed to share the minimal level of data of your personal health, specifically around COVID, to your employer. And that's where we get into, we've got this daily symptom tracker. It's very rich with information and data. We don't share any of that information, what your symptoms are, how you're feeling, duration, none of that. Only that you may be at high risk and you've been asked to isolate and stay at home. And so that, again, we think of as an actionable piece where you as an HR professional will be like, okay, this person is getting the treatment and care that they need. At this point in time, I may need to inform their team, or I may need to be able to backfill their shift, things of that nature. So that's one piece, whether you are at high risk or not based on the symptomology. The second piece that we ask for in that authorization waiver is the result of that test. And again, very actionable. If it's negative, fantastic, go back to work, live your life. If it is positive, then all these other protocols come into play, contact tracing, return to work policies, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how we, one, provide the actionable data to the team while protecting the patient and ensuring that they're getting the care that they need.
Great. Right before I bring Kat joins us to go through the questions, if done properly, should employees feel comfortable about returning to the workplace?
I think the answer is yes. And I think that the key word there is if done properly or when done properly. Yeah, you can feel safe. And I think that some of that comes from, again, going back to the education, understanding, well, where does the risk come from? For me as an employee, I need to understand that in my context, right? In my role, in my day-to-day. And then it's important as the employer or the business leader to be able to demonstrate, well, here are your risks, but look at how we're addressing those. And again, I would give you the example, and it's not the same, but we have, as Ann had said, we're inviting people with COVID to come into our clinics. Our clinical staff are playing roulette multiple times a day on that, but they feel safe and comfortable. Now they're using PPE and protocols to a whole different level. But when you consider that if you're able to screen out symptomatic employees, and you're really talking more now about asymptomatic spread, that is a lower risk environment than what you might even have if you go to the grocery store, where you don't have control over what's around you. So I think that there definitely is a way of doing this where everybody can feel comfortable and should feel comfortable. But it comes down to, that level of comfort's only going to happen if you've both done if you have a plan and you actually do what the plan says.
Great. So let's switch to get some of your questions answered. We've gotten a good number in the past hour. Kat, welcome. She's on and she'll take it over from here.
Awesome. Thank you, Lauren. And thank you both for joining us. This has been really, really interesting. I know I've learned a lot, and I'm sure our participants have as well. So yeah, we've gotten a good set of questions from the from the Q&A function. If you have any other questions, feel free to plug them in. You'll see in that Q&A, if you click on Q&A, there's an agenda listed there, which is where we're listing out the order of questions that we'll ask in. So the first question that we got was from Jonathan Pham. I'm just gonna turn on your speaker now, Jonathan. I know you submitted a couple questions, but feel free to ask both of them. You should be able to talk now.
Hi, good afternoon, guys. Thank you for hosting. My first question is, how can we innovate faster and better during COVID?
Jonathan, that's an amazing question. And I think that we're all probably still asking the question this many months in, which is a little bit unfortunate. I think that there are definitely appropriate yet difficult regulatory hurdles to innovating in even outside of a pandemic. Some of those were relaxed a little bit, especially when it comes to the FDA approval process for new medical devices or tests. And obviously testing is something that has been very important early on in the pandemic, very important for trying to contain it. And now that ship has kind of sailed. So now we're really talking about not only containment, but also how can we return to some type of normalcy. So the FDA process has been relaxed somewhat in that it's now easier for companies who manufacture these to get approval to get them out into the marketplace. But I would tell you that there's still barriers, and it's unfortunate that we're in a situation where we don't have more testing options and capacity. And the reason why I separate those two is because we talked about PCR technology. That is the backbone of most of the testing we're doing to look for active viral infections right now in the pandemic. The issues are that it's very expensive, it's not really fast, and the challenge to accessibility is that it requires a fairly complicated supply chain, whether it's all the way from having a swab to perform the test, the PPE to wear while you're performing the test, to the lab reagents, et cetera. I actually, this is a interesting fact. The two major plants that were manufacturing most of the swabs in the world, one was in China and the other one was in Northern Italy. And so we had a direct hit at the same time, and it basically shut down swab manufacturing. And that's actually what became a constraint early on in the pandemic, just being able to try to get swabs to get the test done. Having more modalities, maybe that have orthogonal supply chains or other types of technology, or there are things that are coming around the corner. I'm sure some of you guys have heard of CRISPR, the gene splicing technology that's being used for therapeutic or explored for therapeutic reasons is also being used and developed for diagnostic purposes, where we can now look at a specific segment of the viral RNA, clip it, trigger a marker that we can detect. And that's a really promising technology that's hopefully right around the corner. But that's something that's been in development for a while. And some of that just, you can't rush, but some of it I think we could speed along by getting better access to getting it out clinically, doing more, more trials in a distributed manner that allow us to get that test technology out there.
Yeah, the one thing that I would add on to Sujal's comment, and I think it's incredibly important, that there are new test technologies that are coming out. There's new ways that we're thinking about this. What we have planned, our protocol today is based on what is available, what we consider to be best of breed. We're also considering infrastructure possibility as well. We talk about thermal scanners, we talk about the ability to do more biometric tracing. So part of our job as a medical partner is to continue to view any new tests that come in, whether it's an antigen test, whether it's an antibody test, whether it's a CRISPR test, whether it's a saliva test. Every time something does get an FDA EU approval, we take a look at it. We do a small clinical trial within our own team to understand the science behind it, if it's going to be a viable test we'll offer to our customers or not. And then beyond that, we think about the physical infrastructure and the different pieces of technology that we can incorporate so that we have a more holistic view. And we're also researching things like, hand washing, for example, very simple, but very, very effective. And there is a technology partner that we're working with that has the ability to track how often people are actually washing their hands and for how long. And again, you think super simple, we've been told to do this since we were kids. We don't really do it as well as we should. And if we were, how much more preventative could we be within the workplace? And so I think that there are definitely aspects of this where it becomes a very holistic view around not only do you test people, but what else can you do outside of that to create a more safe environment. And I think those are all the things that we continue to research and look at and provide partnership in.
Yeah, and I want to kind of tag on to what Ann had said, because, you know, she brought up the hand washing technology. It's not brand new technology. It's something that we're familiar with from a hospital setting, but we think it should play an important role. And what we love about it is it kind of takes you further upstream. You know, most of the focus has been downstream on just diagnosing once it's happened. We think it's also important to kind of shift some focus upward and try to look at how can we prevent it from happening in the first place.
Wow, that was great to hear from, you know, professionals. And the biggest thing is getting everything to be socially acceptable and wanting to ensure the safety for everybody. Like I'll just give you an example. Like when I go to the gym, I always clean after I use the equipment. I noticed that prior to this whole pandemic, a lot of people haven't been doing that, but nowadays you're seeing people actually cleaning it before and after, like little stuff like that. But more so is that, you know, getting to the underlying issue of how we can, you know, resolve this, you know, immediately. And this kind of goes over to my second question. How long do you think this pandemic is likely to last?
Yeah, Jonathan, I think that's the $1 trillion question, right? You know, honestly, I hope it could be within within a year or 18 months. I actually think it may take more like a couple of years before we can really start to see this in our rearview mirror. And the reason why I say that, you know, obviously there's two pathways out of this. It's either herd immunity, which typically takes 60 to 70% of your population has already been exposed to it and immune, so that you reduce the likelihood that even if they get exposed to the virus, that there's any transmission on from that person. So it takes a large amount of your population to be exposed and immune before you really get the advantage of herd immunity. The other pathway is vaccine, and obviously everybody knows there's tons of focus on that and a lot of candidates. But right now they're candidates, and I don't want to discourage anybody. I think there's a lot of smart people working on this around the world, and I'm confident we will come up with a vaccine. But even when we come up with the vaccine, we're still going to have to manufacture hundreds of millions of doses, and now we have to distribute them. And you know, I'd kind of rewind us back to the swab story. You know, we just have not really demonstrated that we're able to execute on that as quickly as possible across our nation yet. I'm hoping we get smarter from this. I truly do, and I think we can. You know, I think we're a very resilient society and extremely resourceful. So I've got hope, but I think that we're probably looking at 2 years before we can really kind of throw away our masks.
Got it. Thank you for sharing that, Sujal. That's helpful. I keep like pushing my thinking back. I remember back in March, I was like, well, by June, this will all be behind us. And then that just kind of keeps getting extended farther and farther. So good to reset my expectations now. Great. I'm going to invite Andrea on the line. She asked a couple of questions as well. Andrea, you should be able to talk now.
Hi, yeah, so thank you for this very informative session. I just wanted to know how you guys are quantifying in terms of metrics that you're using for productivity and how your employees are, and whether you're seeing, in the event of a dip, how you're addressing that, and maybe how you might want to work on increasing or extracting more value or productivity. So that's the main question.
Yeah, so I think it's a really good question, especially as, you know, I would address it based on what your population looks like and what type of work that you're doing. And so we think about essential workers, and then we think about office workers. And you know, frankly, from our standpoint, being very personal about it, our essential workers are clinicians, and they have been more productive than ever. We typically have something along the lines of, you know, 40 to 60 people, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Sujal, that come into one of our clinics on a daily basis. Now we're looking at over 100 on a daily basis. And it is hard work. They're again at constant risk, but really one of the things that we continue to try is to think about their mental health, what their needs are, ensuring that they know that they have the ability to take a break, to stand out. We actually have limits on number of people that each clinician can see. And at any point in time, they can raise their hand and be like, I'm out for the day. I just had too much. And so there are these new guardrails that we've created to protect the mental health of our clinicians, because we know that they're in a place where they're highly productive, but we want to be able to keep them there because we recognize it's a marathon, it's not a sprint, and that we want them to be healthy, happy employees in the long run. And the great thing is they're so committed, and they're out there helping and caring for people, that mission alone is driving them. But that's not enough. And we as a management team have to be very aware of that so that we don't create any burnout. From a kind of office, kind of shelter in place, white collar office, we're not in the office yet. We still have a voluntary program for people to go into the office, but the majority of people are still working remotely. And I would actually address the same thing, that people are working at probably harder and longer hours than they have in the past, because it's so convenient to be on Zoom, boom, 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 back to back all day long. And again, we think about the mental health, the stress, the qualities of life there, ensuring that people have the outlets if they need. And so there's mental health professionals that we have and access to. We also do webinars when it comes to meditation and the ability to have some stillness and calmness. And we do, these bi-weekly company meeting sessions. And so I don't think that productivity has taken a hit. I actually think it's on the other side, where it's a very stressful period in everyone's life, and there's a ton of work to do. And Sujal, would love your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, no, I think you really captured it well. I think that it's it's a Goldilocks thing. Like, obviously we don't want to lose too much productivity in the business. There are probably industries, and we've worked with industries where they just know that they're going to take a hit in their productivity, and they just throw up and get on with it, right? And because ultimately what you want are your employees to be engaged, safe, healthy, so that they can be sustainably productive. So I think everybody's interests are aligned there. I think, as Ann had said, I'm actually witnessing more that there's probably more risk on the burnout side because of the blurring between home and office, right? And your work-life balance. There is none anymore, and I think we got to rediscover it. I also believe that by the fact that you're on this webinar, the fact that you're engaging in creating a plan to do this safely is a great surrogate marker, right? Of how much you care about your team, and they should know that. You should all take credit for that. It's important because it's easy enough to just send a memo that, oh, hey, we've got a plan, but you should celebrate the fact that you've got a plan. You should actually engage your folks in the plan, because they're the ones who are going to tell you, how do you become more productive? If there's a risk of loss of productivity, it's your folks on the front line who are going to be able to tell you how they're able to adapt. And we've been very fortunate. We're a technology company and we're a medical group all in one. And so we were able to leverage our technology in a way that actually allowed us to have our clinicians be even more productive, yet not burn them out. Like, it's easy to just kind of turn the treadmill up to 12, but that only lasts so long.
Totally. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We've seen the same thing across our portfolio companies, just less vacation days taken, longer work hours. And just as you said, this is a marathon, not a sprint. So you got to take it easy. Thank you, Jonathan and Andrea, for your question. There was one more that came through that I wanted to touch on that was really interesting, and I think he's dropped off the line, but Tyler Hathaway asked about the Aura ring that NBA players are using, and what you guys think of that as a metric to consider in testing.
Yeah, and I know we only have a couple of minutes, so I'll be brief. But I think it's very interesting. We are actually also exploring medical devices and those types of physiologic parameters because we believe that there is a role that those can play. But the key will be to really validate how do they work, which signals work, and what can this replace? Because we don't necessarily want it to just be an and on top of everything else we're doing. We'd like to make it an or. And if it could help us with a surveillance strategy and minimize some cost, or increase the sensitivity of our surveillance, we're very excited about that, which is why we're exploring it as well.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. I'll hand it over to Lauren to close things out, but thank you both very much.
Thanks, Kat.
We did get a couple of last minute questions. I'm sorry if we didn't get to them. We would love if everybody on the line can contact us directly to follow up, and we can just connect you or give you as many answers as we can. We will be sending the agenda link out, which will include the resources that we discussed throughout the webinar. And in the coming weeks, we'll also share this video out with the recap of the entire conversation. So again, thank you everybody for joining. Thank you, Kat, for helping with the Q&A, and Sujal and Anne, it was amazing to have you guys on, and we really appreciate all your insight and guidance. And yeah, we just hope everybody stays safe and healthy and just goes back when we're all ready.
Great. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.